Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning or mid-morning, wherever you are. Welcome to the June mentoring webinar by the African Academy of Sciences. My name is Dr. Grace Mwabra, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. And with support from my colleagues who are on the organizer edge, Wycliffe and Gladys, will be able to respond to any technical challenges that you may have. Before we start, we hope that you're well and you have adjusted to this new way of working, connecting online and getting to meet from around the world online while we work from home. There are a few broad rules to enable us to have a successful webinar today. You will remain muted, and as well as your videos will remain off for the rest of the webinar. You can ask a question by clicking on the right hand side where we have a questions tab, and we'll be able to respond to your questions as they come through. If you have any technical challenges, use the chat box, and our organizers will be able to respond to those technical questions as they come through. Your questions, the ones that you typed in when you're registering, as well as the questions that you're going to ask today shall be responded to at the end of the presentations that we have today. So let's focus on today's webinar, where we shall have, which is specifically targeted for post-PhD researchers, or rather researchers with an interest to collaborate across disciplines. The output of collaborative research is often intended to have real-world impact, and hence the researchers are involved who are involved are able to achieve what neither could have achieved by themselves. This webinar will focus on how you as a researcher from diverse scientific backgrounds can collaborate in understanding and refining research questions, accessing and analyzing appropriate data, and thereafter presenting your results and recommendations for decision-making and implementation. Our panelist today, Professor Eric Vance, will be drawing from his experience of working in collaborative teams under the Laboratory for Interdisciplinary Statistical Analysis, or rather LISA, to inspire you to improve on your collaborative skills. So Professor Eric Vance, whom I have the privilege of introducing today, is an associate professor at the Department of Applied Mathematics at the University of Colorado Boulder in the USA. He has a PhD in statistical sciences from Duke University, and he is the director of the Laboratory for Interdisciplinary Statistical Analysis and the Global LISA Network of 2020. And this specific lab has collaborations in 11 countries, and of these, 9 of them are in Africa. Today, we're also delighted to have a discussant who is a mentee of our main speaker, Dr. Olawale Awe. He is an assistant professor of statistics at the Department of Mathematical Sciences at Anchor University in Lagos, Nigeria. He's also the director of the Anchor University Center for Interdisciplinary Statistical Science and Data Analysis, and he holds a PhD and master's in statistics, and as well as an MBA. Dr. Awe also is an affiliate of the African Academy of Sciences, selected in the year 2018, and both of them are mentor and mentee on the AAS mentoring scheme. So with those few remarks, I want to welcome Dr. Eric Vance to make his presentation. After his presentation, I will invite Dr. Olawale to make a short presentation, after which we'll come to your questions and answers. So Dr. Vance, I will be sharing I'll be giving you the rights to share your screen. Dr. Vance, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Grace. Thank you for your introduction. And let me.
Yes, we can see your screen, so you can, enlarge it. Fantastic.
Okay, and so you can just see the main title slide?
Yes. It looks good from my end. The presenters are also okay.
Well, thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak with this group. as mentioned, I am the director of LISA. LISA is the Laboratory for Interdisciplinary Statistical Analysis. And just briefly, what LISA does is that we train statisticians to collaborate with researchers and policymakers and businesses in all areas. And it's through that we have learned what makes strong collaborations and how to create and sustain effective research collaborations. And so LISA is one lab that's at University of Colorado Boulder, where I am. And we have a program called LISA 2020, where we have a network of more than 20 labs around the world. And the majority of them are in Africa. And so here is giving a talk. This webinar is about how to create and sustain effective research collaborations. And on this title slide, we see that there were 30 people from around the world that came to a symposium, a LISA 2020 symposium last year in Malaysia. And so this is a subset of the LISA 2020 network, a photo of that subset. So I'm going to start this webinar with a little bit about my own background. So I have been able to successfully merge my love of international travel with my passion for statistics and for collaboration and for advancing science and advancing scientific research into policy decisions. So this started a long time ago, 18 years ago. I was traveling around Africa, and so there are two photos here of actually my first meeting of a researcher in Africa was at a border stop in Western Sahara and Mauritania. I've been to University of Juba in South Sudan. That was 8 years ago. I've done led research projects in Mozambique, and I've traveled through Nigeria recently, in Tanzania, Ethiopia, as well as South Africa recently, after my travels throughout the continent. And what I really have learned through a lot of my travels is that there is so much talent everywhere, and what we really need to be able to address societal issues, to address the challenges, is we need to facilitate collaboration. So there are many people have pieces of the puzzle. They have expertise in their own areas, but if we can get them together, then they can work together and collaborate and solve big problems. So this talk is really structured around 5 essential elements of collaboration, and these elements are attitude, structure, content, communication, and relationship. And so these 5 elements are what I call the ASCCR frame. So this ASCCR framework helps produce effective collaborations by reminding us what to focus on in our collaborations and to help us learn specific collaboration skills that are essential for making these collaborations effective. So I'm going to be talking through each of these 5 points, and then at the end there should be time for questions, as well as another panelist, Dr. Olawale Awe, who is the first LISA Fellow. He will be a discussant and will also be able to answer some questions. So the first element of our framework, the ASCCR framework, is attitude. And so I think a fundamental attitude is that collaboration is important and it can be learned. So, as I mentioned before, the biggest challenges today are too big for any one person to solve. And so we need to foster collaborations between multiple people to be able to solve the challenges of today. So the first step then is to develop a collaborative attitude, because that sets the foundation for effective collaboration. So some examples of collaborative attitude are, some examples would be some attitudes that I have, or that you have individually about yourself. So one of those is that you are an expert in your field and you can make contributions. You might not know exactly what contributions they are before a collaboration starts, but you know that you do have expertise to bring to a problem. A second would be an attitude about the person or the people that you are working with. And that would be that, the people I'm working with, my collaborators, are experts in their field, and they have valuable contributions to make. And then together, we can accomplish more than any individual could alone. And so thinking about the attitudes of yourself, like, why are you engaged in research? Why are you in science? And maybe it's because you see problems, you see challenges, and you want to use your expertise to help solve them. And so if you really want to solve a problem, it's probably necessary to form some collaboration with other people who have skills and expertise different from your own. So just having that collaborative attitude sets the foundation for effective collaboration. The second part of our framework is structure. So there we go. You want to structure your collaborations to ensure success. And so here I list on this slide 5 different aspects of a structure of a collaboration. So the first would be that you and your collaborator mutually determine your goals. So you decide that, what the goals of the collaboration are, and you both share them. You want to agree on the timeline, and then decide who will do what by when. And so who will do what, that's, what are the roles? So I am a statistician, and so when I collaborate with researchers, my role is typically to work with the researcher to refine the research questions. So I keep asking, what do you want to accomplish? What are your research questions? And then I always ask, why do you want to do that? Okay, why is that important? Until I think I really understand what it is that the researchers are attempting to do. And then I work with them to figure out what kind of data they have available, and can we make a specific research question that can be answered with the data that we have. So that's one of my roles, is to help develop the research question and really translate that into something that's quantitative, something that's statistical. And then another one of my roles is to actually analyze the data and then help interpret the results, and then help communicate and to write some parts of the research manuscript that will result from our collaboration. And so you want to determine what is your particular role in the collaboration, what is the other person's or the other parties, what are their roles. So doing that at the beginning of the collaboration provides structure for who will be doing what, and also by when. And then there are still more questions that help determine the process of how will you work together, how will you communicate. Will you have regular meetings? Will you communicate via email? Will you communicate via telephone? Will you communicate via WhatsApp? These are things to determine before, as the collaboration is beginning. And finally, even as the collaboration is beginning, it's important to think about how each of you will be sharing in the benefits of the collaboration, the rewards of the project. So, in academia, the rewards are often a published paper. And so, at the beginning of the collaboration, as you're defining roles, you also want to define who will be an author on the paper, who will be the lead author, who will be a supporting second author, or the last author on the paper. So a few resources for structuring collaboration meetings are, I wrote a paper it's available. It's a paper on the ASCCR Frame. It's at this bit.ly/ASCCR Frame. And some more resources for actually how to structure specific meetings with collaborators is what we call the power structure, and that's available listed at this website. So an example structure of a collaboration is that, let's say that a microbiologist needs assistance analyzing data. So she is trying to understand how microbes and bacteria grow on different types of paint. And the idea is that if she can design better paint, then that will lead to having to paint buildings less often. It'll be more efficient. It will be more environmentally sustainable if there can be some way to control bacteria within paint. And so she's collected lots of data, but she's not really sure the best ways to analyze all of her data. And so this would be one example of a great opportunity for collaboration, where she would invite a statistician to collaborate with her. And so kind of the 5 steps of the structure of this collaboration would be to understand what is that goal. So maybe the goal is to publish a paper about the research solution, and to decide on a timeline that the manuscript should be submitted by the end of the semester. And then in terms of the roles, maybe the statistician will model and analyze the data and create tables and figures and write the statistical methods section of the paper, and then bullet point key results. And the microbiologist will write the introduction, do a literature review, and then take those results and write those up in words, like in paragraphs, in the language of her field, and then write the discussion and the conclusion about how this research fills a knowledge gap and how it can be useful. And so those are the roles. And so then deciding on like the process, maybe they decide to meet every 2 weeks in person to assess the progress, and that if there are any questions on either side, they will be using WhatsApp. And finally, the sharing of the rewards, they would agree that the microbiologist would be the lead author and the statistician would be the second author, and this results in a paper that's published in a high impact journal. So that's an example of the process of structuring a collaboration. So the next stage in our framework, the ASCCR framework of attitude, structure, content is the next one. So content has 3 parts. We call this Q1, Q2, and Q3. So the first part of every collaborative project is qualitative. Both parties need to agree and understand, like, what are the research questions? Why is this research being conducted? What kinds of data could answer these research questions? What kinds of data have been collected? These are all qualitative questions that need to be answered first. And so that's why it's Q1, it's qualitative Q1. These are qualitatively, what is the research about? Why are we doing it? Then the second step really of any research project is quantitative. So these would be quantitative methods of accessing, collecting, analyzing appropriate data. And so this quantitative aspect, researchers are sometimes trained in statistics, and so they can do their own statistics, what they've learned through their research, through their degrees in university. They can also collaborate with experts in statistical analysis. And so in my own field as a statistician, and in my professional work of training other statisticians, 95% of our training is in this Q2. It's quantitative. How do we take data, analyze it, and get statistical results? So personally, in my own field, there's so much training on quantitative that I actually focus my educational efforts on the qualitative aspects. So on the collaboration aspects, or on asking great questions, or on explaining research and statistics and communicating it. So anyway, in the content of a collaboration, this middle part is the quantitative. It's analyzing data, basically. But once you've analyzed data, you're not done. Maybe you get a p-value that says p equals 0.3 or 0.03, and that doesn't answer any research question. So always the third part of the content of any collaboration is, again, qualitative. And so we call this Q3, where these are the qualitative answers to the original questions. So what is the answer to the research question? Are there recommendations for transforming this evidence that has been generated into action, via policy recommendations, policy changes? Should there be future research? What should the other members of the research community, how should they use these results? How should that guide their future research? And are there business applications? What maybe this is a research project that has to do with how a business is run. Well, so then what are the decisions that the business people should make? These are all qualitative, basically qualitative answers that answer the original research questions. And so this is the structure that we use for the content of every collaboration. It starts qualitative, Q1, and then it goes to the quantitative part, Q2, and then that quantitative results, those are translated back into qualitative findings, conclusions, and recommendations. The next step of this ASCCR framework is communication. And so I think we are all aware that how vital a role communication plays in the work that we do, in the collaborations that we have. So my thought about communication is that the goal of communication is to create shared understanding between all parties of a collaboration. And what I mean by the shared understanding is that I know something, and I know that you know something, and I know that you know that I know that thing, and that I know that you know that I know that you know that I know this thing. And so this is this idea of common knowledge or shared understanding, where we want to be very explicit about how much we know about the project and how much the collaborator knows. And we should each know what each other knows. And so that will eliminate misunderstandings, it will strengthen a relationship that we have, and it will help help sustain an effective collaborative relationship. So if the goal is to create shared understanding, what is the process for that? And I think for both sides, the process starts with asking great questions. So you want to ask questions of your collaborators that provide you the information that you need to make a deep contribution to the work. And you want to ask the questions in a way that actually strengthens the relationship. And so I have other talks that will be listed in the resources section about how to ask great questions. But I think that really is a fundamental aspect of communication within a collaboration, is to ask great questions. Then you have to do something, with the responses to these great questions. So you listen to hear the content of the response, and then you paraphrase to clarify the content. So you paraphrase by restating in your own words what you heard, and that helps you to really understand what's going on, to clarify what's happening. It also creates that shared understanding, because by clarifying and paraphrasing in your own words, you are letting your collaborator know how much you understand. And it's so often the case that I will ask a question and I will listen to the response, and then I will paraphrase. I will say in my own words, okay, so if I understand correctly, you are trying to do X, Y, and Z. And then the collaborator says, well, actually, I'm doing X and Y, but not Z. That's not what I want to do. I want to do, something else instead. And so then I will paraphrase that. I say, oh, okay, you want to do X, Y, and W, and then they say yes, exactly. And so that lets me know that they know that I know what the main goals of their own research are. There's still another step in this whole process: listening, paraphrasing. The last step is summarizing. So, after we've discussed one topic, I really like to summarize what was discussed, and that summary can be in words, but it can also be typed up, like in notes of a meeting, or it can be written on a chalkboard or a whiteboard or on a notepad. But summarizing is our way of solidifying that information. One analogy that I use is with memory. So, our brains, we have short-term memory and long-term memory. And so I think of paraphrasing as short-term memory that puts the idea in our working memory. It lets us think about it, to clarify it. Summarizing takes that idea and puts it into our long-term memory. And so if you have a summary that is in writing, that's perfect, because maybe 1 month after you have a meeting with the collaborator, you might not remember what it was that you discussed or decided. But if you have this long-term memory of the summary in a written document, then you can find that written document, read it, and remember what was discussed, what was decided. So this process of communication is ask great questions, and then you listen, paraphrase, and then summarize. And that allows both parties to really understand what each other knows, and to create that shared understanding. There's one other aspect. So we actually, my colleagues and I have developed what we call the triangle of communication, where there's asking great questions, listening, paraphrasing, summarizing, and then the other vertex of the triangle is explaining research concepts. And we use a method called the ADEPT method, where we use analogies, diagrams, examples, plain language, and if necessary, technical definitions to explain research scientific concepts. So I have other resources on this ADEPT method. I find it personally, it's a very effective way for communicating for me to communicate statistical concepts It's great to have an analogy about what this is like, some other concept that the collaborator is familiar with, to draw a diagram. I think the best 2 words in any explanation is for example. So, for example, I am meeting with a researcher, and I will talk about how this concept is used in her own research as an example. And then it's best to use plain language because in a collaboration, in an interdisciplinary collaboration, both parties are not in the same field, and so there's different words. And so if you use plain language, that will help in communicating. And then when necessary, you can have a technical definition. So maybe you write down a formula or you use the jargon, and that can, all of those components can be a way to explain research concepts. There's another aspect of communication, which is communicating your project results and your recommendations. So that after a project is completed, or after a phase of the project is completed, you can use these methods to communicate it. So, as I mentioned earlier, the Q1, Q2, Q3 process is the way that we do research. We always start qualitative with what is the research question. Then we use our quantitative methods to try to answer that research question. And then Q3 is the final results, the qualitative aspects of what is the answer to that research question. What is it should we do? But that's not the way that we should communicate our research to other parties. We should use a different order. And so the order that I recommend for communicating research is to start with Q1, qualitative. So what is the research question? Why is it important? What is the context of this research? That's important to start with. And then go directly to Q3. What is the answer to that research question? What are the findings, conclusions, or recommendations? And then you, after you've stated your findings, conclusions, or recommendations, you go down into as much detail as necessary in the Q2 quantitative aspects. And so you have to decide who your audience is and how much technical detail they want. A great way to know that is to ask them how much they want, and to have more quantitative information prepared than you are planning on communicating at the time. So if you're doing a slide presentation, you might have 5 quantitative slides, but you're only expecting to show 1 of them. But if there are questions that are asked, then you can go deeper, deeper, deeper into the quantitative methods. So this quantitative is, what were the methods? What are the technical details? How did you arrive at your findings, conclusions, or recommendations? So I think that for communicating your research externally, you always want to start qualitative with Q1. What is the research question? And then you state your findings, which are statements of fact. These are results. Or you state your conclusions, which are summaries of the findings and the connections between them. Or even you can just state your recommendations, that this is what we think that you should do. So recommendations are what we hope that our audience will do. It's what we recommend them to do. And that's often, that's the whole aim of the research, is to do something that will change somebody's actions, that will cause them to do something. And so these recommendations are, what do we want people to do with the work that we have created? And so this presentation process can be repeated. And so the idea is, you start off by talking about the overall context of the problem and the questions that you're trying to answer, and then you answer a piece of that question. with the Q3 finding, conclusion, and recommendation. And then you go down into as much quantitative detail as necessary. But then you go to the next answer, so the next Q3 finding or conclusion or recommendation, followed by some technical methodological details. And then the next qualitative finding, conclusion, or recommendation. And so this can be repeated for as many finding, conclusions, and recommendations that you want to communicate to your audience. We're coming now to the last piece of this collaborative model, and this is relationships. So strong relationships are key to collaborations. And so I've just recently developed this what I call the PQRST model for collaborative relationships. And I'm not sure if I will stick with this model, but the idea is that there are really 4 different dimensions or components of a relationship, and those are P, Q, S, and T. So P is the process of a relationship. So it's what do we do? And our relationships are built in a process of working together. So what is our frequency of meetings? How do we communicate? That really builds and maintains a relationship is during this process. The quality of a relationship is asking yourself, how are we together? Do I trust my collaborator? Does she trust me? Are we committed to the same goals? Do we like each other? Are we, do we have loyalty to each other and to the project? Do we like working together? These are aspects of the quality of the relationship. Then there's, as I've mentioned before, parts of the structure of a relationship. So are we comfortable with our roles? Are we comfortable with the incentives, the potential rewards that we will get by engaging in this collaboration? Have we decided on the goals, and do we share these goals, or are we working towards different goals? If we're working towards the same goals, then that will provide for a much stronger relationship. And finally, the last component of this relationship model is time. So relationships are built over time, and continuity is important. So, it's not good practice to just only talk to somebody when you need their help, but to have a relationship over time that's continuous, and hopefully it will build over time. And so to evaluate your relationships, you can ask yourself questions in these 4 dimensions of relationship. So ask, how is our process? Is our process effective? What should we change? One way to do that is to ask your collaborator. Say, we have had meetings every week for the past month. Do you like that frequency? Would you like to meet more often or less often? It's a good practice just to ask your collaborator. You also want to ask yourself. Maybe you feel you need more face-to-face communication, or maybe you need less. So ask yourself about the process and whether it is effective, and ask your collaborator those same questions. You also want to ask yourself, what is the quality of our relationship? So what is the strength of the relationship? What needs to be improved? So you can ask yourself that. You can also ask your collaborator. You can say, we've been working for the past month. What do you find that has worked well? What could we do differently to make our relationship stronger and to make our collaboration more effective? A third set of questions to ask yourself is, do we have the right structure for this collaboration? Are the goals aligned? Do we have clarity on how the rewards will be shared? So do we have the right structure? And then finally, you can ask about timing questions, like ask yourself, is our relationship strengthening over time? And maybe you ask yourself, is it time to end this relationship? So not all relationships will continue until infinity, for all eternity. Many times it's good to end the relationship, and maybe you will start that again on another project, but to have some closure when it's the right time to end a relationship. So here are a few tips for creating and sustaining relationships. So one is to express authentic interest in developing and building a strong relationship with your collaborator. So you might say, I'm really happy that we ran into each other at the last faculty meeting, and I find that your research project is very interesting, and I am very interested in working with you on this project. Saying that will really help create a strong relationship with the collaborator. Also, asking your collaborator for feedback. What is working? What is not working? This is a great way to create and sustain a relationship. You want to respect the skills that the collaborator brings to the project, and value those skills. And that goes back to the initial attitude that together we can do so much more and accomplish more than we could alone. When we have interdisciplinary collaborations, it's important to learn and use the language of the collaborator's discipline. And that's part of this aspect, this idea that effective communication really is key. So you always want to be asking great questions, listening, paraphrasing, and summarizing these responses to create shared understanding between you and your collaborators. And finally, building strong relationships requires time, patience, and trust. So allow it the time to build, be patient, and build trust. So there are some ways to build trust. You should be reliable, meet the deadlines, keep your promises and commitments. You want to be honest, tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So don't omit some messy things that you might not want to talk about. Be honest, tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Be credible. So you need to gain expertise in your field and make deep contributions to the project. By doing that, you will establish your credibility, and your collaborators will trust you more. Another way to build trust is to be vulnerable. Admit mistakes whenever you make them. Apologize. And if there are things that you don't understand, be honest about that. Express your vulnerability and ask the questions if you don't understand. When you have a strong relationship, when you have a collaboration, the idea really is that you are collaborators and you are peers. You're both working towards the same goal. You are on equal footing. And so if you don't understand something, it's in everybody's best interest for you to understand it. So admit that you don't understand and ask questions, and that can model behavior for the other person. When they don't understand something that you've said or that you've done, they will ask questions, and you get the chance to explain it to them. And in that way, you're building trust that you're building trust in them, and you're gaining in trust. They're trusting you more. So we're finally near the end of my presentation. So I'm going to ask you, as a webinar participant, okay, so how does one create and sustain effective research collaborations? I'm actually going to pause for 1 minute, and if you have an opportunity, write down how do you create effective research collaborations, and how do you sustain them? So I will pause, and in 1 minute, I will tell you how I think that you can create and sustain effective research collaborations.
Professor Vance, I can see 2 hands have been raised. I see one from one of the attendees. Would you like them to speak to your question?
I think so. So the minute has passed. I think what I'll do is I will continue with the presentation, and then we can have questions just in a few moments. Does that sound good?
Yes.
So I think that for creating collaborations, the first step is to adopt a collaborative attitude. So you want to find a collaborator such that you can both help each other and that you both win by engaging in this collaboration. And agree on a structure. So share goals that will give you both benefits and rewards that you share. So agree on this, adopt a collaborative attitude and agree on the structure. And that's a great way to create a collaboration. And then to sustain a collaboration, you need to be making deep contributions to the project. So you need to be, having important findings, conclusions, and recommendations about the content of the project. To sustain collaborations, you also should be communicating to create shared understanding with your collaborator. And finally, to sustain a collaboration, you should be working to strengthen your relationship. So if you follow this ASCCR framework, these can help you both create and also sustain effective research collaborations. So my final slide is just a map about the LISA 2020 network. So we have statistical collaboration laboratories in countries all over the world, and they're actually focused in developing countries. And so we have throughout Africa. So not everywhere, but in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe and South Africa. We have statistical collaboration laboratories that have been created. And so here are some resources. The ASCCR Frame for Learning Essential Collaboration Skills. That's what this webinar was based on. And it was just recently awarded the Best Paper Award from the American Statistical Association for the Journal of Statistics Education in 2019. So there's a link to access that paper. It's open access. I also have created and assembled what I call collaboration in a bag. These are materials and resources at this website, osf.io/xmtce. And also, if you're a researcher that you want some help analyzing your data or designing your project or accessing appropriate data, maybe there is a LISA 2020 Stat Lab near you. You can go to our website, lisa2020.org, or have a contact, send an email to lisa2020@colorado.edu. And so, again, here are just kind of a map of where some of our stat labs are. And finally, so thank you for your attention. And so now I think is a great time for questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Vance, for such a wonderful presentation. As I was listening to you, several things came to my mind as someone who is an interdisciplinary researcher and as well managing the African Academy of Sciences mentoring scheme. There are several things that you mentioned that as an interdisciplinary researcher I employ and as a mentoring coordinator are very key for mentoring relationships. Attitude, communication, and having a shared understanding between the collaborators, asking questions, listening, and trying as much as possible to paraphrase what you have understood so that the other person is on the same page with you. But you also talked a lot about relationships and how important it is that they are strong and they are structured and there's a timing attached to it so that you don't keep a relationship even when it's not delivering. But there's the mutuality that you talked about. You don't just communicate because you need something, but you communicate even when you just want to keep that relationship going with your collaborator. And the points about patience and building trust. Some of the questions that have come through during the registration stage are related to some of the things that you have touched on. But before we take the questions, I will ask our discussant for today, Professor Olawale Awe, to make a short presentation because you have been working with him. And after that, we'll go to the questions and answers. So Awe, I'll share the screen and you can start speaking from your slides that I've just put up together. And Professor Vance, I'll just share a short message with you about the questions that are coming through now. Over to you, Awe. You can unmute yourself and I'll share the screen. Kindly let me know if you can see my screen.
I can see it.
Thank you. Awe, over to you. Olawale, we can't hear you, so I'm not sure if you're speaking. Could you try again? Olawale, we are not hearing you. So what I will do, I can see you've gone on mute. We will check on your audio. Vance, if you're okay, we can proceed to the questions that have come through.
Sure.
So before we take the questions that are coming from the attendees right now, I would like to flag some of the questions that were sent during the registration stage, and I will do that by showing you the screen. I hope you can see the screen, and I have tried to organize them in a way that you can respond to them as they follow each other, but perhaps briefly go through them and respond to some of them, and then we'll take those ones from the attendees who are currently on call. Over to you, Eric.
Great. So I see that there are a number of questions, and so far I've read the first three, and they're all really good questions. So let's see. Okay, so I think I'll just start with a first one of what are the fundamental personal characteristics one should look for in a prospective collaborator. And I think there are two dimensions to really look for. One would be the content, the task, and the other one would be the relationship. So what I mean is the first component is you should look for somebody who is an expert in their field, somebody who really knows what they're doing, somebody who has been successful. So if they have had successful collaborations in the past, then they would be a great person, likely to be a great person to collaborate with in the future. And if they're working on something that interests you, so thinking about the project, am I excited about this project? Is this person an expert in this field? You know, those types of questions about the project itself, the task, the expertise of the collaborator, that's one aspect. The second aspect would be the relationship. So do I know this person? Do I like this person? Do I like working with this person? So if the answer is no, then you should not collaborate with somebody that you don't really like working with. But at the very beginning of a collaboration, you don't know them personally, you don't know how their relationship is. And so, you know, if you're really excited about the project, then I think you should probably take that chance and start that collaboration and then build that relationship. And then if the relationship is bad, you know, you can ask them for feedback, try to improve that relationship, but sometimes two people just don't work well together. And so therefore, you know, you should end that relationship, you know, and look for other collaborators. So that's how I would answer that first question. Some information about maybe, you know, capturing the imagination of a prospective collaborator. I think I would again focus on two aspects. One is focus on the exciting work that you are doing, and then focus on a little bit about how you are as a person, and what that relationship might look like with the collaborator. So I think it's best to have some kind of relationship with any future prospective collaborator, and that might mean that you work in the same university. That could be, you know, that's you're all under the same roof, so that's a great connector. But sometimes you can actually have a personal connection. So you can say, this is who I am. This is the project I'm working on. I was talking with a mutual friend of ours, and she recommended that I reach out to you to see if you would be interested in doing such and such. So that's that could be a structure of an email. One other thing would be to include a specific ask. So in your email, ask a specific question that requires a specific response. So something like, are you interested in discussing this further? If so, would you be able to meet next week via Zoom? Specifically from 3 to 4 p.m. from all afternoon next Friday, I'm available. You know, would you like to meet at 1 o'clock in the afternoon next Friday? So that's an example of something specific to include in your email. So what makes research collaborations fail? I think there are so many different aspects of collaboration that I talked about in the ASCCR framework. And so I think there can be a failure of attitude, there can be a failure of structure. The content can be not well developed or described or thought about. There can be failure in communication, and just the relationship itself can be a failure. So one more aspect about the relationship is that in my professional career, I think for for the first 18 years, I was focused on the task, the content, the task or the content, not on the relationship. And now I am thinking, oh, actually, there are two goals for a collaboration. One is to make a deep contribution, so to answer some scientific question, to make a policy recommendation, to make some change. That's the contribution, that's the task. The second goal of a collaboration is to create a strong relationship. And I think that in itself, just creating a strong relationship is a goal of a collaboration. That being aware of that is can help you avoid failures in collaborations. And so for the beginning of my career, I always just focused on the task. But now I'm starting to become more aware of the importance of the relationship, even independent of the task. The relationships are very important, and I'm still working on that. I'm not really all that great at developing strong relationships. So some more questions of how do we take statistical research out from our school to our workplace to help solve economic problems? And so I think this is a question that's relevant really for all researchers. So how do you take the knowledge and the evidence that you're generating in the laboratory, from your analyses, and actually transform that into action? And a key thing is that just to recognize that one person cannot do everything. And so your skills might be in developing evidence, doing research, being in the lab, doing experiments, doing research. And your strengths are not in then translating that into action. And so that's where it's fantastic to have a collaboration. So this is how to get your research out of your lab into society, is to collaborate with somebody whose strength is being in society and being able to do action, but their strength is not in scientific research. And so if you are able to meet somebody, maybe it's a policymaker, maybe it's a government official who wants to do something to change some policies to improve the lives of people, you can start with a relationship with them and asking them, what is it that they want to be able to do? What are the unknown questions that they have? What are some questions where if the answer were yes, they would do this. If the answer were no, they would do something else. Something where the answer to the question will actually affect their actions. And then once you have that relationship and you understand what it is that they want, then you can provide the research and work with them in collaboration to then they can implement your research. So specifically about taking statistical research from the school to the workplace for economic problems, I don't think that you can do your statistical research and come up with a solution and then shop your solution, because people won't, either the solution is meaningless, maybe the question is meaningless, or they just don't buy it. So you have to start with having them ask the question. So if there's a business, you can ask them, what are the key questions that you have in your business? And then once they've identified the questions, then you can help analyze and answer the questions, and then presumably they would implement your analysis. So that's a way to take your research out from your lab into the wider society, is to find somebody in the wider society who actually cares about the answers to questions, and then you focus your research on answering those questions. Shall I continue with these questions and answers?
Perhaps we could pause there so that we give a chance for those who have asked questions on this webinar to have their questions responded to, and then we can come back to this. The ones at the top were the priority, and I think the others we could respond to them later on. So what I will do, so Olawale's audio is having a problem, so we have agreed that we're going to allocate him some of the questions to respond to. So as the participants keep on asking questions, I will direct some to them and he'll directly type in responses to everyone for everyone to see, and that way we'll keep that interaction there as well. Let's start with one very interesting question here from Kingsley, especially because you're collaborating with Olawale, who is also your mentee. And I'll just read out Kingsley's question. What are the advantages or disadvantages of having a collaborative relationship with your mentor? Or should you collaborate with your mentor, knowing there will be imbalance in power or in the relationship?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting question about this power balance. So my thought about collaboration is that there should be equal footing. So even if there is difference in experience, even if there is difference in titles, so maybe one person is a full professor, another collaborator might be a graduate student. In a collaboration, you value what the other person brings to the collaboration, and that helps to level the playing field. So that's what I always aim for in a collaboration, is really to see the value in the other person, and that they are making a contribution, and that together we can solve the problem, whereas alone I could not solve the problem. And so that helps, I think that helps to level the playing field, even if there are differences in power. In terms of the mentor-mentee relationship, that's I think mentors need to understand that a mentor-mentee relationship is what we call a two-way street. So that the mentor can learn just as much from the mentee as the other way around. And so I think that's on the mentor to have that mindset that they are mentoring somebody with less experience. However, that person with less experience probably has better computer skills or knows more about the current state of the literature, or their skills are sharper in a certain area. And so for the mentor, there's a great opportunity to learn from the mentee. And so that's also the way that I approach the mentor-mentee relationship. Now, not all mentors will think like that, and not all of your collaborators will think of having an even playing field. If you have been young in your career, inexperienced, and always looking up to experienced people, and now 20 years have passed and now you're the experienced person, you might feel it's your due, you're ready to be the high exalted hierarchical power figure. But I would encourage anybody who's a mentee to think about, when they become mentors, to really think about the two-way street, the engagement. And for all of your collaborations, even if you have more status, you should think of everything as a level playing field. So that's my comments. I don't necessarily think that I answered the question, because I don't think that there always is an answer. If you have a mentor who's very old and set in his ways and is not very collaborative, like does not value what you bring, then you can't do much to change their attitudes. You can only change your own attitudes. And when you have that power in the future, change your own attitude so that pattern does not always continue into the future.
Thank you very much, and I agree with that point that yeah, you may not be able to change some people, but you always have to judge and see who can give you what. And even in our mentoring relationships, we always encourage our mentees to seek out what they are very sure they can gain from one person and seek out for another goal from another person. There's an interesting question, two of them which are sort of related. One is from Nadir, and the question is, thank you for a very enlightening presentation. How do we address strained relationships in collaborations? And I will read the follow-up to that from another person, Bully. How do you handle differences of opinion or approach during the course of a project as a primary researcher? Some of the collaborators may have differences in how things are done. How do you handle that to ensure you achieve your set goals? Over to you, Eric.
Great. So for the first part about strained relationships, I think conflict is always going to happen. It will be natural. And so it's how you deal with the conflict that really determines how what the outcomes will be of the relationship and of the collaboration. And so if you have a strained relationship, then I think the best thing is to be open and honest and to bring out, the strain so that you can talk about it. And so, maybe there's a collaborator who is treating you badly. So maybe always interrupts you or tells you, oh no, that won't work. Oh no, that's a stupid idea. And so maybe the first 2 times it happens, you ignore it. But then if it keeps happening, then it's important to address this, to say, to give them feedback, to say, I've noticed that you interrupt me often, and that makes me feel like I'm not a valued member of this collaboration. And then you can ask them, hopefully they will admit it and apologize, but you can say, I need to be able to help you and to be able to work well on this project. This is what I need. So you can talk about your needs and how you need to be able to not be interrupted, to be able to make a contribution on the project, to be able to do your job. And so, the idea is that it's in their best interest to repair this relationship so that you can add value to the collaboration. So that's what I recommend, is to try to repair the strain by bringing it out there, saying what it is that you need to be able to contribute. And then this kind of can go to the second part of the question. The second question is, if they say, oh, no, you're stupid, well, then you know that you should wrap up this collaboration as quickly as possible and move on. And, your time is valuable, your expertise is valuable, and so you should look to work with people who value you. So if you can't repair the relationship, then you should probably end the relationship. And then the second question is how do you handle differences in opinions and approaches during a project? And I think this is a great part of the collaborative experience. If you think something should happen and they think something should happen differently, you really need to talk about it in to be in a curious manner, to say, I'm curious as to why you think we should do this approach, and listen, and keep in mind that presumably you both have the shared goal. So your goal is the same, you're just not in agreement on how to get there. So I think you should really listen and engage and let them convince you that their way is right. And if they don't do that, because then you have evidence and arguments for why your your way is better, then you should bring those out. And if you're going towards the same goal, then in a real collaboration, you should have that back and forth. And it could be that a combination of your methods actually works the best. And so thinking about how you can resolve your differences so that you're all working more effectively towards your shared goal, that's what we should be aiming for. And so if you are the primary researcher and it's like you have veto power, then you don't really have a true collaboration. And you're not really valuing the experience and expertise that that your collaborators bring to the project. So you should think about it like, do I actually value their expertise? And if I do, then I want to learn more about why they believe the way they believe. So that's partial answer to that second question.
Thanks very much, Charles. I'm looking at the time and I see we have 10 minutes remaining. So what I will do, I will look at questions that have not been, you've not addressed during the presentation or during the question and answer session. And I'll read this from Samuel Bojo. One of the challenges is in effective collaboration is the ability to identify who to collaborate with. In your experience, what determines your choice of collaborators in the research you have done? How did you manage your collaborators' conflict of interest, if any, in your research? Over to you, Evans.
So if this question is about really who do you choose to collaborate with, or in my case, who do I choose to collaborate with? So that's an interesting question, because my answer is maybe not exactly what you would expect. But so I run LISA at the University of Colorado Boulder. LISA is the Laboratory for Interdisciplinary Statistical Analysis. I have graduate students and undergraduates and some other faculty members who are involved with LISA. And we are open to all researchers around the university and some policymakers and businesses in the local community. And so they request collaboration projects. They actually go to the website and they type in their, some background about the project, and then we assign, who they are to work with. And so, so I do get to choose, who specifically. So my answer is that I don't choose who requests collaboration. I do choose on the projects that I specifically work on. And so the way that I choose that are really two ways. The first is, will this project be an opportunity to train my students in interdisciplinary collaboration? So if this will be a great opportunity to train my students, then I will collaborate with that researcher along with one of my students or two of my students. And then, I will be there to help my students learn and to give my students experience. And so if I think it's maybe a very, let's see, so if it seems like it's a very easy project, then maybe I just assign it to some students. If it's a medium project, then I might work on it along with my students so that I can be there to support my students as they're learning about interdisciplinary collaboration. And then if it's a very hard project, then my students, maybe they don't have enough of the expertise, then it might be something where I take it myself or another faculty member would be assigned on that project. But basically, yeah, so I look for opportunities to work on the project and also train my students. But the second piece is, does this project seem really interesting to me? So that's what I would that's what attracts me to projects. So, you know, a recent project was that a researcher had sent mice into space in the rocket to study the effect of microgravity. So to study the effect of space travel on the bone growth in the mice. And I thought that that was a very interesting project. So I wanted to be part of that. A third component, which I actually don't think that I address much, is the person themselves. So, you know, if this person is a really productive researcher and has lots of papers going out, you know, then maybe collaborating with them is a great way for you to also have more papers and build up your academic resume. Or maybe you know this person and you like this person in a non-professional context, and so then you want to work with them because you enjoy being around that person. So I would think, for me, I guess it is three ways that I choose who to collaborate with: is who will give me an opportunity to educate and train my students, who has a very interesting project, and who will be a productive researcher to help me build up my academic resume.
Thanks very much, Eric. I will read 3 more questions and we will be done for the day. This one is from Albert, and I'll read a part of it. One more interest to me is the marriage between qualitative discussion by a veteran in quantitative analysis. My question is how we can dig more into this opportunity of using our quantitative knowledge to communicate to policymakers who understand qualitative researchers better than the statisticians who could help better with categorical data.
Right. So, yeah, this marriage of qualitative and quantitative is very interesting because as a statistician, I'm trained in the quantitative, but I think that the qualitative is more important. So, so I just think that following this Q1, Q2, Q3 content of a collaboration is, you know, provides a good template where you have to understand the qualitative aspects of what does the policymaker want to do? How will the researcher use these results? Before we even have any results, what kind of data could answer these research questions? Maybe before we have any data. So you have to really understand the qualitative first before you move into quantitative. And then once you're doing quantitative, you're not done. Even if you think that doing the quantitative is your job, if you finish the quantitative, you're not done. You need to be able to translate the quantitative back into the qualitative for Q3. So if you don't understand Q1, if you don't understand why this research is happening, then you're not able to then do Q3, the last qualitative piece. And so really focusing on making sure that the domain expert, the researcher that you're collaborating with, agrees that you understand these qualitative pieces at the beginning is the most important thing before moving on to quantitative. So I guess the you know, one question to ask would be, do I understand this research problem and why we're doing it? So you wouldn't just ask that yes or no question. You would say something like, so let me see if I understand what the motivation is behind this research. Ultimately, you are trying to cure malaria because you yourself have gotten sick, you've had family members who have been affected by malaria, and so specifically, you are trying to understand the geospatial distribution of malaria incidences so that we can focus our resources on the high prevalence areas. Like, do I understand the research question? And then they say, oh, well, sort of. And then you keep on doing that. You keep on doing this process until the researcher says, exactly, it's exactly what I want to do and why I want to do it. And so focusing on that will help navigate this Q1, Q2, Q3 qualitative, qualitative process.
Thanks very much, Eric. So there's a very interesting question here from Akani, and he'd like to know your view about gift authorship by any one of the collaborators. And let me read the other last question so that you can respond to the two of them together and we can end the webinar there. I would like to know the level of engagement in an interdisciplinary collaboration. By this, I mean what makes up for each contribution in terms of proportion. I guess this person is interested to know whether it's 20%, 50%, or 70%. Over to you, Eric.
Sure. So I follow some guidelines. They're from the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. Sometimes they're called the Vancouver Protocol, where co-authorship, only people who do 4 things are co-authors, and you have to do all 4 things to be a co-author, and that's make an intellectual contribution to the work, to write part of it or revise the content significantly, and then agree to, read the entire work and agree to be a co-author, and to understand who is responsible for which part of the research. And so everybody who satisfies these requirements should be a co-author, and everybody who doesn't satisfy the requirements should not be a co-author. So gift authorships, are not important. There are opportunities for somebody, maybe some senior mentor who maybe provides some funding or connects people, creates the collaboration. Maybe they are given an opportunity to revise the paper and make their contribution in the revision stage, and then that could be an authorship. And so that in that case would not be a gift authorship. It would be, they actually did contribute to the paper. And so that's what I recommend. And this idea of like, what is the proportion? The proportion could be 95%, 5%, or it could be 50-50. It's anywhere in between. The main idea, though, is that together you can solve it with 100%, but alone you cannot do the project, or you cannot do the project in the right amount of time. So I know in statistics, there are researchers, they could do the project, they could figure out the statistics, but it might take them 9 months to figure it out. Whereas if they collaborated with a statistician, it could be done in 1 week. And so, maybe in that case, the researcher has done 90% of the work already, and then the statistician comes in only for the last 10%. But that's still a collaboration because there are still roles. The statistician has this role to analyze this data. The researcher has the role of developing the research question, collecting the data, interpreting the results, and understanding how that fits in with the literature. And so even if it is a 90% 10% or 95% 5%, that 5% or 10% still contributed to the entire project. And so that's something that each individual collaborator should, on each project, should really decide in advance, to talk about in advance, what are the roles, and do we agree that this is a collaboration and that we both need each other to be able to come up with the final 100%, that none of us can do 100% all on our own. And so I think that's probably the main idea of the collaboration, is that it's not really about percentages except for the 100%. Together, can we do 100%? And then that's a good collaboration. If apart, we could not do 100%.
Wow, thanks so much, Eric, for those answers and for the presentation. What a great webinar we have had today and the conversation around collaborations. It builds up on previous conversations we have had this year about setting up a research lab, moving to becoming an innovator, but also exploring new career pathways. When I was listening to you, I could see all the connections with this webinar. So if this was your first webinar with us, be sure to check our website and our YouTube account to see the previous webinars, which are very much connected to this one. Thanks very much, Professor Eric Vance, for accepting to offer this webinar, and to Olawale, who had a challenge joining. I ask you, the audience, to look in your handout section, and you will find the presentation that Olawale intended to make. You will find it there, and you can send any questions to us to direct to him. To end this webinar, I'd like to make two announcements. We're going to have the next webinar on science communication. I think that's going to be quite exciting. How do you communicate science in Africa? And we have a lineup of 3 panelists, very diverse, with really different experience. Come listen to them on the 29th of June. I think the time will be from 3:30 East Africa time, but you will see that if you have subscribed to our newsletter, or if you follow us on Twitter, you'll get more information about that webinar. And on the 29th of July, we'll have a webinar on more focused on mentoring relationships with our mentors. So thank you very much for joining us. The final announcement concerns our call for affiliates that is open. You're most welcome to submit your application. If you qualify, you should have your PhD at least in the last 2 years and must be below the age of 40. But more details are on our website, and you can look through that and share with other people who may qualify for that. We accept applicants from all disciplines, so none is left out in that case. So thank you very much for joining us. We had an attendance rate of about 48%. I think that was great given the numbers that we had registered. And we hope you send us more questions or recommendations for the kind of webinars that we may run to support you. Any questions you may have on mentorship, we are available to answer them to you and guide you in the best way possible. Thank you. Goodbye, Kwaheri, and see you soon. And keep safe.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you for hosting this, and for everybody for attending. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.